to be here. Well, as is our custom, what we do is we always begin with a short meditation to help us create a sacred space where we can be together, to step away from the outside world and just focus on our inner journey and those people here who are accompanying us on it. So please sit and relax in your chair and close your eyes. Maybe give yourself a little shake to settle in. And then inhale through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And inhale through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And as you go at your own pace of inhaling through the nose and holding, and exhaling through the mouth and holding. If thoughts should come into your head, just observe them and let them pass. Like watching a car move past on the road. Now is not the time for solving problems. Right now, all you need to do is inhale through the nose and hold, and exhale through the mouth and hold. And on your next inhale, say to yourself, Shema, and on the exhale, listen. Shema, listen. In Shema, we're listening deeply, without judgment, without offering advice. In Shema, we are listening with an open heart. Shema, listen. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes. Okie doke. I'm going to share my screen so we can look at our first discussion prompt for today. You see this all right? Again, our journey so far as we began in March, just coming together so we wouldn't be alone. And that has turned into what was our first Mussar cycle, and now we're into our second Mussar cycle, where we will again be looking in greater depth at the 13 soul traits that are covered in my book. There are many more soul traits than this, but these are ones which I think are particularly helpful, at least particularly helpful to me for dealing with the modern world. Last week, so most of us, I would say the majority were here last week. And I would be curious, for those of you who were, or maybe who watched the recording, we talked about humility and boundaries. And having too much humility can be just as bad as having not enough. And similarly, if we set boundaries with relationships that are too firm, it can make it hard to connect with other people. But if we set boundaries that are too porous, then we can be taken advantage of, or be sort of emotionally impacted in ways that are not healthy for us. So I'm wondering if someone might want to share how humility and boundaries sort of showed up for them in the last week. And I'm just going to let my cat in here. Sorry about that.
I have some.
Janet?
Yeah, I have a couple of things. One is I was in a breakout session. Am I muted? Am I live?
You're live. I can hear you.
Yeah, I was in a breakout session last Friday night, and there were two people who were dominating the conversation, and it bothered me. And I was upset about it because I don't think they realized that they were dominating. And, and I didn't want to feel small, so I actually wrote them a note. Instead of putting myself down, that, maybe it might be good to stifle sometimes so that everybody can share. Because I was feeling small. And another issue, I have an article that's in this week's Palo Alto Weekly, in which I talked about going through the agonies of creating a singing by myself online. I'm singing by myself for purposes of a video, and thinking how horrible I sounded. And I said to the person who recorded that, did I sound as bad as I thought I did? And he said, yes, but I fixed it. Well, I did not include that in the story because I felt that was an over-humiliation and decided not to.
Yeah, well, thank you. Those are two great examples, and thank you so much for sharing them.
Okay. Wendy here.
Yeah.
Well, I was just sharing just a minute ago. We went to Mammoth and we hiked, and I learned by hiking, I didn't do very well this time, and I learned that maybe your place changes, and you have to kind of be aware that you might shift and move around in your place, so don't get entrenched where you think your place is going to be. I wasn't the best hiker, and I usually am, and so I was really surprised and humbled by it. I just realized, well, sometimes you just have to accept where your place is, even if it's a new one.
Thank you. Yeah, accepting where your place is. Sonia.
This is Pat speaking. Is Sonia?
Sonia
muted,
had raised her hand, but I'm not. I saw her lips moving, but I couldn't hear you. You're not muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I realized that I take more space than I should because I had a conversation with my husband a few days ago, and he was expressing how he's torn by a personal issue between doing something and not doing it. And instead of listening to him from a compassionate place, I was telling him how to fix the issue. Until he finally said, let me allow me to express my feelings without telling me how to fix it. So I think it's a lack of humility there rather than lack of listening. Is that right?
I think that is, you could definitely interpret that, yeah, absolutely, as a humility, a trap that we can fall into from a humility imbalance, taking up a little bit too much space. That's great. That's great self-reflection, and we've all been there, but we haven't all caught ourselves or sort of understood afterwards what had happened. So thank you for sharing that. Now, Pat, you had wanted to say something.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, Pat here. I want to piggyback off of what Sonia just said because it's very much related to what I want to share. So the first thing I want to share is that I reworded the slogan so that it was something that I could remember. And so I put it this way: let there always be the right amount of me. And that sticks in my head because I created it. So, and I do need a boundary around my mouth. That's where I need a boundary. So I made a conscious, intentional effort this week to not speak to hold back speaking, to wait longer than I would normally do that. And So one of the ways I do that is I take notes. I've got my pencil and I've got a pad of paper. I'll take notes. And then I'll ask myself, is that really, how important is it that I share that? Did that person ask for my advice? Did they ask for feedback? So these are intentional questions that I'm finding myself asking. And I get the satisfaction of writing down these wonderful thoughts,
Yeah.
but I don't necessarily have to share them. And then the last bit is that I've been reading about silence and how important that is and how valuable that is. And that helps me a lot.
Yeah, that can be one, like sometimes we work on an imbalance in one soul trait by practicing another. And what you just talked about was practicing silence to help bring humility into balance and to take up less space. So thank you, Pat. That's a wonderful, wonderful example. Yeah, John, or Frank, sorry. You are mute.
Couple of things. I had an occasion to talk to a younger family member, and I reminded myself that that when we talk to somebody younger, we should listen more and talk less. So we were exchanging with each other what we're up to. He lives in Texas, and so at some point I was mentioning about the Mussar that we're taking here, and that we were instructed that when we talk to somebody younger, we should. And I think I did a very good job. I just want to refer about, so I thought that was pretty good. He appreciated that.
Yes.
The other thing is that it's very interesting. I worship with my conservative synagogue twice a week, Wednesday morning and Saturday mornings. And I noticed that during the Shemona Esrei, instead of kind of saying all those words, I just sing to myself. For you, silence is praise. For you, silence is praise. And then, Haddu miya tehillah, Haddu miya tehillah. So I would just kind of repeat that for myself. And it was, it's a good way to enter it. Too many words for me.
Yeah. There's such strength, and thank you for sharing both of those examples. There's such strength in a mantra or a short phrase. And, you know, these prayers were designed to help create certain experiences. And well, I do like some prayer services because of the music. I don't have the kind, for me personally, I don't have the kind of spiritual experience that I might have from chanting or from meditation or from other things. So if you can make a connection and do something that's meaningful and deep for you, I think that is so awesome. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And it is one of the ways that we can, one of the advantages, I guess, of COVID times, where we can kind of do that in the privacy of our own home and mute, and, there's not like any need for an explanation or discussion with others. So that's kind of interesting as well. All right, I think so this week we are going to look at a different issue of humility than we dealt with last week. So I'm not going to talk about the assumptions since we did that before. I want to talk about what happens when we have too much humility. And although on one extreme, sort of if we have too much humility in general, we can get into kind of self-debasing and doormatty type behaviors. But sometimes we can have too much humility in particular situations where we have an opportunity to step up, or we have to act kind of in a way that's not in concert with the norm, and we might be held back from doing that. So there's some very interesting examples in literature and from people. This is something from Maimonides. So may I have a volunteer to read this, please? Just unmute yourself.
I will.
Okay.
Okay. It's sometimes okay to violate the commandments. Just as the doctor amputates a limb or foot in order that a patient survive, similarly, the court rules at any time to transgress a few commandments for a term in order that the masses may one day return and fulfill all the commandments. Thus, any court may rule at any time, Ziman min hazenanim, to violate some commandments temporarily in order to sustain them. For example, all of the commandments, as was commanded by the early stages, violate one Sabbath so that one may observe many Sabbaths. My mom, Nenny's.
Thank you. Okay, so what is he teaching us here? What kind of situation is he talking about, and what are the points that he's making? Just to kind of state in our own words without agreeing or disagreeing with them. Let's make sure because there's a couple of points here, so let's make sure we understand what he's saying.
You know, the first thing that strikes me is that it's to act according to what the greater good would be. The greater good.
Also, it's the commandment to that life is most valuable. So, for example, if you are older and haven't eaten in a while and it's Yom Kippur, you're supposed to eat to take care of yourself, take care of your body, or, you know, feed the child because that child needs to eat, even though you're supposed to fast on Yom Kippur.
Right. So there's so thank you.
And I think priorities and intent, looking ahead and imagining, seeing ahead.
Yeah, so there's definitely absolutely an element of kind of looking ahead and looking at the situation. And Maimonides, as some of you may know, he is the one who codified the Torah. He wrote a book called the Mishnah Torah. He's the one that enumerated the 613 commandments that we're supposed to obey. His writings are the basis of a lot of Jewish law as it was developed in the subsequent centuries, and the halakha that the more traditionally observant would follow. And here he's saying that in some circumstances, it's okay to violate, the laws if it's necessary kind of for the greater good. Janet, I got a little note that you had raised your hand.
My question is the relationship between this and humility.
Well, what do people think? Do people see a relationship between this and humility?
Greg, could you please repeat her question?
Yeah, Janet was asked a great question, is how is this related to humility?
Okay. What I'm noticing is that in humility, and then with this particular passage, I'm hearing two things. The ability to have to sacrifice. So the patient sacrifices their limb because in order to survive, it has to come off. So there's a greater good in that. The humility is letting go of the ego that says, no, I want to keep my foot. I must keep my foot. I must keep that foot. You can't take it off. And then you die because you get gangrene and it moves into your heart and you're gone. So to me, that's where I'm seeing, hopefully that helps with Janet's question, but I think that's where I'm making the link.
Great, thank you.
It seems to me that it has to do with not being so dogmatic about the mitzvot that you overlook the situation and the preservation, like someone said, of life. So it's not hard and fast all the time. It is situational. And that where that ties in with humility is you could stand on the mitzvot and say, well, this is right because the mitzvot, it tells us to do this, and only this. But then you look at the situation, and if, like it was mentioned here, if you violate one Shabbat so that many may observe, one may observe many Shabbats. In other words, it may not be today, but if it preserves a greater observance, do it. It's okay. So you have to let go of the pride that would say, oh, I'm right. No, I'm right, because you're not supposed to do this. And I'm not going to do that. But if it either saves life or it causes an elevation of the mitzvot later, it's perfectly fine. I think that's where you let go of pride and you go to humility.
Thank you. Carol.
I'm thinking of our present situation. Say it's Shabbat and you're not supposed to drive or do work on Shabbat. Your friend calls you, says, look, I need to get out of here. I need to take my horse with me. You have a trailer. Can you come and get me? Well, I don't drive on Shabbat. So your friend and her horse can't get out of the hills and maybe perish. Now that's not a mitzvot. That is not. So I would say that, and right now we may be faced with that kind of thing because of these fires.
Yeah, Carol, I think that's really an important point, and it's something that I've heard implicit, like somebody needs to decide. Like somebody needs to say, yes, this is an exceptional time. Like the doctor needs to say, okay, we need to amputate. Or you need to say, like some people might turn to a rabbi and say, is it okay to drive to go get my friend and their horse? But maybe, the rabbi's not going to answer the phone on Shabbat. So you might have to make that decision yourself. And I think this is a good segue to our next example. So this is from an article I just found today on My Jewish Learning about Rabbi Israel Salanter, who is the founder of the Mussar movement in Lithuania in the 19th century. He created yeshivot. He had a lot of disciples. So there's a lot of text here, but I think it's worth reading this story. So may I have a volunteer, maybe someone we haven't heard from yet, to read this first paragraph?
I'll read.
Thank you.
Jewish law permits the violation of all but 3 sins in order to save a life. And Salanter actively encouraged people to do so if they needed, especially the laws of Shabbat and keeping kosher. Salanter's son later reported that the only time he ever saw his father angry was when another rabbi challenged the public violation of Shabbat by Salanter's students. Salanter also advocated relaxing certain mourning laws to avoid weakening mourners and making them more susceptible to illness.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's pause there. For context, this was during a cholera outbreak.
Oh, okay.
So he was very, very proactive about trying to combat the cholera epidemic. Mm-hmm. So for this passage that John's read, how does this relate to what we've talked about, and what does this add to kind of our conversation?
It reminds me of the fast on Yom Kippur. If you're sick, if you're ill, you're not supposed to do it. Mm-hmm. Right? Or if you have some kind of condition, it's the same idea, don't you think?
It is. It is. I will say, though, that there's a similarity. I'd say that at least in our time, and probably then, it was pretty well established that if you're sick, you don't fast on Yom Kippur. How is this different? was this like a well-established sort of principle that Rabbi Salanter was following here?
I'm reminded of a situation that happened in an ultra-religious neighborhood in in Jerusalem, probably. There was a fire on Shabbat, and the residents didn't know what to do, so they went on mass to the rabbi's house to ask him, do I have permission to call the fire department? The result of which is homes burned, and that community really had trouble getting fire insurance in the future. It's almost like Helm, where people were not thinking that the law became larger than life instead of the other way around.
Right.
Right.
So, yes, go on, Joanne.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't understand the previous page at all, how being lax in certain is going to bring the community back, because I feel like the opposite has happened in America. Being lax has led to more people being lax, and I'm observant, and I get that. I get, that anything to preserve life, you do it, whether it's Shabbos or Yontif or whatever it is. The first thing is to save lives. And so that comes before, like walking to the rabbis on Shabbos to ask him something while the place is burning down doesn't make any sense. And fasting if you're ill or fragile doesn't make sense. But I don't understand the idea that desecrating Shabbos in general, even once, is going to allow you to observe it other times. Unless it's one of those things where in order to save your own life, you have to desecrate Shabbos so that you'll live to celebrate Shabbos another day.
Yeah, Joanne, let me pause you there. Yeah, it's not saying in general you can do this. Maimonides would not say that. He's the one that set up the rules for Shabbat. He's saying, but if the house is on fire, don't worry about calling, don't worry about carrying water from somewhere else. Bring the water and put the fire out. It's like, because the whole village could burn down and then nobody gets Shabbat because everybody freezes to death in the winter. So that's very much, and that's a really important point though, because I do think that we're going to get to that a little bit, but I think there's a fear that sometimes comes in. It's like, well, gee, if I call the fire department, what's the rabbi going to say? Because look in this story. Salanter was challenged. One of his students was out there working on Shabbat, trying to save someone's life, and he was challenged.
Okay.
He was challenged for it, and that's where I'm going to go back a couple of slides here. Because that's what we're talking about here. If we have too much humility, you're not going to step up and say, I'm calling the fire department. I may get excommunicated. I may have to apologize to the rabbi, but I'd rather do that than have the place burned down.
Right.
And that's where, for us, like looking and saying, where have I been I'm going along to get along here, but maybe it's really the wrong time to do that.
That's really important because there's a psychological principle. It's a behavior, and I cannot recall what it's called, but I've read about it. And that is, if there's somebody who's injured, and that you're in a public arena, and there's someone injured, and you can tell that person needs help, but nobody in the crowd is stepping forward to help that person, you're very unlikely to step in. So people are reticent to go against the crowd. And I think that's the same idea here. We really need to be told it's okay. If somebody's in danger, step forward. And how much more so if it's where you're in a religious setting, you don't want to violate or offend, so it's even more likely that you're going to step back.
Yeah, that's a great segue to this next paragraph. So you talk about chutzpah. Some people may have read ahead, but can we have a volunteer to read the second paragraph here?
I'll do it.
Okay.
Salanter felt that fasting on Yom Kippur would put lives in danger and that it would desecrate Judaism if Jews died trying to observe the fast. Though he held no official role in the Vilna rabbinate, on the eve of Yom Kippur, he placed proclamations in all the synagogues telling people not to fast, to shorten synagogue services, to take walks, and to help each other in all ways.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's like, me, rabbinical student, going to every synagogue in the Bay Area and putting up signs telling their congregants what to do to, deal with COVID. So this is how is this different from if I'm sick, I shouldn't eat? How is what he did different than that principle?
The opposite. If I'm sick, I shouldn't fast.
Right, if I'm sick, I shouldn't fast. Right, sorry. If I'm sick, I shouldn't fast. How did he sort of goes way beyond that decision about his own health, though.
Right, he's telling other people that's how they should think. And,
Greg, Linda here. Is this also during the time of cholera?
Yes, all of this is during the time of cholera. So
so we should remember the context. You didn't just do this on any ordinary day, but it was unusual time.
Right. So he decided, he's very famous for kind of walking the walk, because it's one thing to say, he said, okay, I'm in a leadership position, I'm going to stick my neck out, and I'm going to tell people. But that wasn't everything he did. He was worried that people would ignore his signs. So he walked to the front of a synagogue with wine and cake, made kiddush, and ate in front of everyone. The people were in shock, with one member publicly challenged it to him as why he was issuing edicts in Vilna instead of the official rabbinate. So why was he doing this?
Can I?
Yeah.
It's Wendy. Well, I think that he was listening. It was Shema for him. He was listening to what, the divine gives him the brain and the ability to listen. And it was Shema. He was listening, and he chose life, which is what we're supposed to do. And then he walked humbly with the divine by going out and doing that. It was just, that's what he had to do.
Thank you. And I like the way you used the word he walked humbly, because we get really trapped in this English definition of humble meaning meek and self-effacient. But this was also an act of humility, because he was a man of great intellect. He could see that people really needed to be strong. He believed absolutely, and he went out and took a stand. And that was an act of humility, to do that. I'm going to occupy the space right in front of the synagogue and ignore the official rabbinate and just really set an example for people.
May I?
Yeah.
I'm reminded of the edict, or what do you want to call it? Pray as if everything depends upon God. Act as if everything depends on you. Now, during this epidemic, there have been ministers, I don't know of any rabbis, who have said, God will take care of us. That is an overhumility kind of statement. It's saying, I don't have any power, God has power. I think that is not the Jewish way. I think we have to do what we can do and let God do what God can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know comprehensively how every rabbi has reacted, and but certainly there have been leaders, all kinds of leaders, who have not stepped out there and said, "This is what needs to be done."
But there is an over-humility when you just leave everything in God's hands.
Yeah,
When
but
you
that's not occupying, that's not occupying like the space that you're supposed to fill. Absolutely. We are in partnership with the divine, for whatever that means to us. So we are in partnership with nature. And if we're not willing to do our part, occupy our space, it can cause issues. So Salanter paid a price for this. I mean, there were pretty good accounts that he did leave Vilna after this, and he was a rising star. He had all kinds of pupils, whatever, and he had to. Vilna was like Jerusalem of its day. This was like the pinnacle of Jewish learning in many ways, and he had to kind of, he had to leave, and so to take a stand like this doesn't, can come with risk. Come with absolute risk. There's my synagogue. Some of us are members of Congregation Beth Am in Los Altos, and our first head rabbi, or one of our first, was a legendary figure, Sidney Axelrod, and he started. And then a week or two later, Martin Luther King said, "Clergy, come to Selma." And he jumped on a plane and went to Selma. And everybody's like, "Don't go. What are you doing?" And he's like, "Hey, I got to do this." He, walked the walk, and, put his life at risk. He put his job at risk because he felt that was his role, where he needed to step up.
And he was indeed arrested and put in jail.
Okay.
I'd like to respond to Janet. I think that what she said is really important. I've observed that in our culture as a whole, there is a sense of humility that is irresponsible, doesn't take the, no better word that I could think of than the responsibility that we each have as individuals to affect life and affect others. And humility, if taken too far, I think it actually becomes a false humility. When you're self-effacing, I think that's like a sense of false humility. It isn't actual humility at all, in my opinion. But I'd like to hear what others have to say about it, unless that would derail our trajectory.
I have one more point to make, and then I wanted to send this out, but I could stop the share if people wanted to comment a little bit more. We have room for another comment or two. Yeah, Linda?
It seemed to me that Salanter was acting like a prophet when he did the work that he did, not a self-aggrandizing prophet, one who was willing to take a risk to prophecy. And also, for me, the connection between humility and decision-making comes from the word discernment, that we don't just do these things because they came to us off the top of our head, but we deeply discern what's right action.
Love that. Yeah, Mussar is all about taking that thoughtful, mindful approach to our decision making. Let's look at an example of a very famous example from the Talmud of someone who had too little humility. So I don't have the Talmud reference here, but there's the saying that Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas had too much humility and caused the destruction of the temple. So the second temple was destroyed by the Romans, there's a story about this guy Bar Kamsa who was humiliated by the people in charge in Jerusalem. And so he tried to set them up and convince the Romans that the Jews were going to revolt. So he gave them a cow and said, hey, give this to the priests at the temple and they can sacrifice it as a kind of a peace offering. But he gave them a blemished cow. And this was a very highly ritualized, there couldn't be any sort of blemishes on the animal. So Rabbi Zachariah knew that this was a blemished animal. And Bar Kamsa's plan was when the priests rejected it and didn't do the sacrifice, he'd say, see, they're going to revolt. And that would lead to a Roman crackdown, and that eventually led to the destruction of the temple. So they knew what Bar Kamsa was up to. And the rabbi was told, look, you either have to just accept the sacrifice, or you have to kill this guy. So he can't go and put the Jewish people in danger. But he didn't step up in that moment. He said, well, if we sacrifice the cow, then people will think it's okay to sacrifice blemished animals. And if we kill this guy, people are going to think it's okay to commit murder to solve issues. And so because he didn't kind of make a decision, the Romans, took this rejection of the sacrifice as proof that the Jews were disloyal, and that led to, absolute historical calamity. So this is where we have, Israel Salanter on one side, where he's really going to go way above and beyond what's expected. Here we have another example of someone who was in a position of leadership and really had to make an incredibly difficult decision. But according to this story, he had too much humility and didn't feel equal to the moment, and so didn't make a decision. So what do people think of this story? Do you agree it's an example of too much humility? How does this fit in with what we've been talking about?
Well, it seems like one of those cases where an exception should have been made because he knew that a fix was in to destroy everything. So, but he didn't do it. And so after that, there was no more sacrifice because there was no more temple.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, were you going to say something?
I was just thinking about, wasn't it Shaul, the king? Wasn't it King Shaul where he was supposed to sacrifice and didn't, or did when he shouldn't have? It seemed like he was always just off in his timing. He made decisions to do things that were out there. It's like he never got that part right. To do what was told of him properly, to do it correctly. I don't know if I can count the ways. I mean, I think he'd be a pretty good example.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting example. I think in the story, he was told to conquer the city and kill everybody and kill all including all the animals. And he kept the animals. The soldiers kept the animals, and because of that, he was told he was disobedient and he lost favor with God. And then he sort of, well, the way I would interpret it is like, oh no, I only kept them for making sacrifices. Aren't we supposed to keep sacrifices? And the answer was, no, you're supposed to do what you're told, which is a theology I don't particularly like. And it's challenging, but you could say that's someone who, he did sort of make a decision. The army was going to revolt, and he said, all right, I'm going to pacify everyone by letting them keep some of the loot. And, he got punished for it. So,
Yeah, he did.
Now, I hope none of us are in that position where we have to make this sort of life or death decision for, like, you know, the fate of the nation. But I suspect that we're all going, you know, may find ourselves in positions in this pandemic where, you know, we do have an opportunity to step up in this way, perhaps. You know, that we are going to be called upon. So for our discussion this week, let me put this up. So can you see this slide? So when I break you up with your partner, talk about, you know, how have you had to step up during the pandemic? Or have you had to go outside of your comfort zone, or maybe occupy a bit more space? Or has maybe too much humility held you back at any point? And of course, as always, you know, take this opportunity to check in. Okay. So let me open up our rooms here. Okay, so you're about to see something that is going to come up on the screen saying join room X. So please click to join that room. And remember, we usually have about 5 minutes, but it could end at any time. So use your time judiciously. And if you're in a room and nobody's there, just hang out and pay attention, because I'll move you to a different room if no one else joins.
Okay.
Okay, and the rooms are open.
We're in room 8 this time.
Very good. And boom, everyone is in their breakout rooms. Okay. I'm going to stop the record. I'm going to pause the record now.
Another stamp, please.
All right, I see everyone is coming back.
About 4 minutes. And
Well, I feel very privileged. Someone didn't have a partner and I didn't reassign them, so we just talked the two of us. You know, I stopped the streaming, so it was very nice to kind of be able to participate. But I'm wondering, we had a really interesting conversation. I would love to kind of hear what may have come up in some of your talks, something that you noticed the way that you've had to step up during this time.
There, now go.
Mainly what I heard from our group was that you have to be firm in your convictions. And if somebody asks you to go out to a restaurant, that there's going to be a party. And maybe there are people that you haven't seen for a while. You have to say no, and that you feel uncomfortable with it. And usually what will happen is other people in the group will decide to do the same thing. So
that's a wonderful example. And what's your name?
Vicky.
Vicky, thank you, Vicky. Yeah, I love that example, because I think in, you know, what we were talking about is, you know, there's a certain personal cost to some of these things, and there's a certain risk, you know, that we have to take. It's a little socially risky to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to be the first one to say no, thank you. I don't feel comfortable with this. Who else? Would anyone else like to share?
Yeah, I've got an example of when I was in the grocery store, and I have 2 risk factors for COVID, so I'm very selective about going out. And when I have to, I go. And so I was in line, and there were, and this happens a lot every single time I go. There's people, either whether I'm in line or I'm looking on the shelves or whatever, no mask, no distance.
Hmm.
And my instinct is to speak up and say, hey guys, you know, could you move back? I have risk factors. But what I've chosen to do is to step back. That I'm not there to educate people. I'm there to, my responsibility is to make sure I'm safe. So I do what I have to do. And it's such a divisive thing right now. I mean, under normal circumstances, if somebody's treading on my toes, I'll speak up. Under these, I don't know how wise it is because people are so strong on one side or the other. So I've decided, and it is humbling. It's like, okay, I guess I will let them go in front of me in line because they're going to be right on my tail. If they're behind me, I'm just going to get behind them and put the space I need, that type of thing. So that's how I've dealt with it.
Okay, a few more. We'll go kind of lightning round here. So Carol.
I noticed, yeah.
Well,
I noticed in my breakout room with Janet and I, we came to the same conclusion as Vicky did, I think she said her name was, that to have the conviction to try and say something doesn't always mean it goes well with the other person, but it was worth it to stick to your truth. That's what it was good. Yeah.
Thank you.
I was talking to Pat, and we did talk about when do you say something and when do you not? And when is it best? And Pat already talked about what she thought. And I said, well, you know, if it's a neighborhood kid or somebody who lets a dog come running up to me or something, I'm going to say something. But I think I thought that Pat's wisdom in the grocery situation it's a different situation. I appreciated it.
Yeah, and there's no right or wrong answers either. I mean, this is really, you know, for us to decide how we want to show up and how we're being called. In our conversation, Lindy and I, you know, we both talked about doing things which weren't necessarily easy for us to do, but the bottom line was, you know, we both kind of, one thing that came was we didn't feel like we had a choice. It felt like this is what we needed to do for the situation. And sometimes it's like, it almost feels like there isn't a choice. It's like, is this what I want to do? Not really, but this is what I need to do.
I thought of what Pat had to say. Miss Manners addressed that in Sunday's paper. Basically, if a person is not wearing a mask in a public place, like a grocery store, that person knows exactly what he's doing. And your best bet, Pat, was to do exactly what you did to get the hell out of the way.
Right, well, it's, Miss Manners is an advice column. You know, we're not in the advice business in Mussar, you know, Mussar group, but there is, you know, again, there's a, you know, again, not a right or wrong answer, but it's a thoughtful answer. And it's a, how do I manage the space? How do I manage my space relative to other people that are not respecting my boundaries? And one option is confrontation. Another option is, you know, I'm just going to take my space and we can go infect somebody else somewhere else. You know, move over here. Well, I would love to continue, but I also think it is important that we maintain our time every week. So once again, please, let's have a short closing meditation. So please close your eyes and relax. And taking a deep breath through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And tilt your head back and smile. Let's take a moment of gratitude for the people in this community that we're building together. For ourselves for taking this time. And may we be supported to occupy our right amount of space, whatever that may be. May we be supported by something greater, and we would hope by people in our family and community. Thank you all so much for being here. I hope you will, in the coming week and after this call, maybe take an opportunity to just write down a few words, a little journaling about what may have come up, and think about what's one action you can take in the coming week to perhaps step into, a role or opportunity that's been offered to you. And maybe stepping in means speaking up, and maybe it means stepping in by stepping back. Only you can decide that. And please, I hope to see you again this week. And once again, feel free to bring a friend. Everyone is welcome.
Thank you, Greg.
You're very
Thank
welcome.
you.
Yeah.